Well, let's stay with the phone hacking story. We can get reaction from Australia, where Rupert Murdoch started his media empire. Joining us from Sydney is the BBC's Phil Mercer. And Phil, the Australian arm of Rupert Murdoch's company is doing everything it can to distance itself from events in the UK.
Yes, Rupert Murdoch's Australian group is called News Limited, and its chief executive, John Hartigan, has written to all staff members here in Australia saying there will be a thorough internal review of all editorial expenditure over the last 3 years. The point of that review apparently is to make sure that those payments were legitimate, and it's clearly an indication that News Limited is feeling the heat from the wreckage of the demise of the News of the World in London. Mr. Hartigan saying to his staff that some other media outlets and politicians in Australia have been trying to link the scandal in London with the operations of News Limited here in Australia, and he said that was completely wrong and unjustified, and that review will take place, and clearly News Limited is feeling the heat halfway around the world from events in London.
Feeling the heat, to say the least, because the Greens party is also calling for the Australian government to investigate Murdoch's News Limited arm of his company. And this all comes at a dreadful time because obviously he's bidding for Australian Network off of ABC.
That's right. News Limited is seeking to expand its television enterprise here in Australia, and we'll have to wait and see what problems Rupert Murdoch's global empire is experiencing in Britain and perhaps in the United States, whether the contagion spreads here to Australia. At the moment, the head of News Limited, John Hartigan, said there was no evidence of wrongdoing within his organisation, and you're absolutely right. The Greens party here in Australia, which has emerged as a powerful force in Australian politics, it now holds the balance of power in the Australian Parliament. It's renewing its call for the Australian government to review the operations of News Limited in Australia, and also the Greens leader Bob Brown says that Australia should review its entire system of journalistic ethics.
And of course, Australia has the most of the Murdoch empire in terms of media control. Just how are the papers, how are the news agencies reporting this?
Well, news of Rupert Murdoch's problems in London and beyond is headline news left, right and centre here in Australia. It's very difficult to get into the car, to flick on the radio and not hear news coming out of London. You pick up the morning papers, it's a similar story, and you turn on the television news in the evening, for example, and we are bombarded with information. And remember, this is where it all began for Rupert Murdoch. He is Australian by birth, although not by citizenship, of course. Born in Melbourne, his global empire began with very humble beginnings with one newspaper in Adelaide, and his company now owns about 70% of the Australian newspaper trade.
All right, Phil Mercer from Sydney with the latest on that. Thank you very much.